Daf Yomi, Tractate, Sanhedrin, page 74. B, top of the page, with the word afilu. Afilu shenoi ak arketa dim sana. Even to change the strap of a sandal. This was the Jewish custom with regard to sandal straps. If the Gentile authorities were to decree that Jews must change their practice and wear sandal straps like those worn by the Gentiles, one would be obligated to give up his life rather than veer from the accepted custom. That's what they're saying here. Okay. V'kama parhesia. Amar Rabbi Yaakov, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Ein parhesi b'chusam asara b'nei adam. Pshita Yisrael beinan. T'chsiv dash b'tzorich b'nei Yisrael. Boi Rabbi Yirmiyah. Tisha Yisrael v'goy echad mahu. Okay, the Gemara asks, and the presence of how many people is required that it should be deemed a public act? Rabbi Yaakov says that Rabbi Yochanan says, an action is not considered a public act, if it is performed in the presence of fewer than 10 people. The Gemara clarifies this point. It is obvious that we require that these 10 people to be Jews, as it is written in the verse, from which we derive the requirement of 10 for sanctification of God's name, and I shall be sanctified among the children of Israel. Leviticus 22:32. Rabbi Yirmiyah asks, what is the halacha if there were 9 Jews and 1 Gentile present? Tashima. The Gemara answers, come in here and answer. From what Rabbi Yanai? Tashima d'tani Rabbi Yanai achul Rabbi Chia v'rabo. As yetoich kesiv hacha v'nigdashti b'soich b'nei Yisrael. Kesiv hasim nibadlu b'toich ha'ida azois. Ma'al nasah v'chul b'Yisrael. Avkan nasah v'chul Yisrael. The Gemara answers, come in here and answer from what Rav Yanai, the brother of Chia bar Abba, teaches in a Braita. This is derived by means of a verbal analogy between the word among, written with regard to the sanctification of God's name, and the word among, written with regard to Korach and his assembly. Here, with regard to the sanctification of God's name, it is written, and I shall be sanctified among the children of Israel. And there, with regard to Korach, it is written, separate yourselves from among this congregation, Numbers 16:21. The meaning of the word congregation, written with Korach, is derived by means of a verbal analogy to the word congregation, written with regard to the spies sent out by Moses to scout out the land. How long shall I bear with this evil congregation? Numbers 14:27. Just as there, the congregation of spies numbered 10, and all were Jews, so to here concerning the sanctification of God, there must be 10, and all of them being Jews. Veha Esther parhesia have, Amrabai Esther karka oilam haisa. The Gemara raises difficulty. Wasn't the incident involving Esther, meaning her cohabitation with Achashverosh, a public sin? Why then did Esther not surrender her life rather than engage in intercourse? The Gemara answers, Abaye says Esther was merely like natural ground, meaning she was a passive participant. The obligation to surrender one's life rather than engage in forbidden sexual relations in intercourse applies only to a man who transgresses prohibition in an active manner. A woman who is passive and merely submits is not required to give up her life so that she not sin. Rava Amar Hanas Hasman Shani. Rava says that there is another justification for Esther's behavior when Gentiles order the transgression of prohibition not in order to persecute the Jews or to make them abandon their religion, but for their own personal pleasure is different. In such a situation, there is no obligation to sacrifice one's life, even when the sin is committed in public. Di lo te mahi hani kavakai Demoniki he hechi avin lahu ela banazas punchani achanami hanazas punchani. Rav explains, as if you do not say so, then how do we give them coal shovels the Persian priests would take coal shovels from every house, fill them with coals, and use them to heat their temples on the festival days. Although this involved assisting idol worship in public, Jews would not sacrifice their lives in order not to do so. Rather, the reason they cooperated is certainly that a measure enacted for the Gentiles' personal pleasure is different. Here, too, concerning Esther, Ahasuerus engaged in intercourse with her for his personal pleasure. A measure enacted for a Gentile's personal pleasure is different, and there is no obligation to sacrifice one's life to avoid it. Ve'azda Rava Datame, Damar Goy Damar Le Ha Israel, Ketol Aspas V'Shabata, Ushidi Lechevasa, Ilo Katin Lach, Liktol Velo Tekatle, She'ile Nahara, Dikatle Velo Tiktol, My Taima, Leboribil Sakabai. The Gemara comments, and Rava follows his own line of reasoning, as Rava says, if a Gentile said to a certain Jew, cut grass on Shabbat and throw it before cattle, and if you do not do this, I will kill you, he should cut the grass and not be killed. But if the Gentile said to him, cut the grass and throw it into the river, he should be killed and not cut the grass. What is the reason for the latter ruling? Because it is clear that the Gentile is not seeking his own personal pleasure, but he rather wants to force a Jew to violate his religion. The sages raised a dilemma before Ami. Is a descendant of Noah who was commanded to refrain from idol worship also commanded about the sanctification of God's name, or is he not commanded about the sanctification of God's name? Amar Abaye Tashima Sheva Mitzvahs Nav B'Noach V'Misa Tamni Havayin Amar LeRave Inhu Kol Avazrayu. Abaye says, come and hear and answer this question from a bride in which it was taught descendants of Noah were commanded to observe 7 mitzvot, to establish courts of law, to refrain from cursing God, idol worship, adultery, bloodshed, robbery, and from eating the limb of a living animal. And if it is so that they are commanded about the sanctification of God's name, then there would be 8 mitzvot in which they are commanded. Rabbi said to him, there is no proof from here, as when the Braita speaks of 7 mitzvot, it means the 7 mitzvot themselves are all associated obligations. The mitzvah to sanctify God's name can be understood as a detail of the prohibition of idolatry. My Havayala, Amrava de Barava, Amri Berav, Kativ Levarazeh, Yisach Hashem Lavdecha. Bevo Adoni Bet Rimon, Ishtachavod Shama Vehu Nishan, Al Yadi Vishtachaveti. Kativ Yomer Lo, Lech Leshalom. The Gemara asks what halachic conclusion was reached about this matter. Rav Bar Ahava says that they say, in the school of Rav, it is written about Naaman, commander of the army of the king of Aram, said the prophet to Elisha, for this matter may the Lord pardon your servant, that when my master goes into the house of Rimmon to bow down there, and he leans on my hand, and I bow myself down in the house of Rimmon, 2 Kings 5:18, that is, he was forced to bow down before an idol out of fear of his master, the king of Aram. And it is written in the following verse, and he said to him, go in peace, indicating that Elisha did not criticize him for acting in this manner.